The proposed football merger of 1933 sowed some seeds of doubt in Australian rules football. Due to the Great Depression, both the main Victorian leagues were bleeding money. Some VFL teams were relying on gate receipts from finals matches alone to stay up, and the VFA clubs were struggling, with only a seventh of the attendance of the metro-focused VFL.
They'd added some new clubs, yes, but lost their version of Geelong, who were pulling in gate receipts as low as £15, leaving travelling teams so out of pocket that they ended up abandoning their poorest friend.
The VFA's only win in this period was landing the amateur sports ground, now known as the Motordrome or Olympic Park, despite the fact that Melbourne wouldn't even find out they were hosting the Olympics for, another 17 years afterward. Great foresight. Anyway, for 1933, the Motordrome began hosting regular season games with the view that in 1934 it would host a game per round, which created a weekly centrepiece game. Fantastic idea, except that it pissed off the councils who own the grounds that the VFA clubs lived in. Losing 2 home games per year drastically reduced gate takings, which isn't ideal during the biggest economic downturn of modern times, in addition to the VFA increasing admission fees. The Grounds Management Association, as they were known, tanked negotiations and kicked 7 of the VFA's clubs out of their grounds entirely before the 1934 season had even begun. A compromise was reached late in March, with the Motordrome to only host finals, except that also didn't happen. The VFA Grand Final was postponed due to poor weather, and the ground was already booked for the next weekend. The VFA crawled to the VFL asking if their match could be used as a curtain raiser to the VFL's preliminary final, which was turned down outright. The VFA was forced to resort to the Showgrounds Oval, which was in poor shape, with only 2,300 spectators attending. The VFA had stopped using the Motordrome altogether by 1936. The one win they had got in the football wars had just turned to a big, fat L. They had lost everything. The VFA, well, they were a joke.
So, to turn this around, the VFA endeavoured to make their league the most exciting of all, turning it into a draw card, and the main way they did this was throwing the ball away. No, really. Since the introduction of a free kick against for kicking the ball out of bounds, regardless of if and how many times it bounced in 1925, teams played one way, long kicks up the middle, avoiding the wings. This led to the birth of the star full forward, yes, but also to predictable game styles and slow build-up play. The hand pass was still a work in progress. A branch off of it, the flick pass, where the ball is passed with an open hand, had been banned at the same time. The flick pass was quicker and opened play up, but was often a throw pass in disguise. Why not just throw pass it then? Well, the VFA legalised a rugby-style thrown pass which eliminated the need to tightly police handballing and opened up the play, increasing the tempo. This was combined with a revamped holding the ball rule, mandating that players had to dispose of the ball when tackled. What they'd normally do is just drop it and draw a cynical holding the man free kick. This was teamed with the reintroduction of boundary throw-ins to promote play along the wings. The final additions were the downfield free kick rule and the 15-yard penalty, both designed to reduce thuggery and time wasting. There were some other tweaks that were rejected by the VFA's clubs, namely getting rid of the rover and ruck rover, replacing the centre bounce with a kick-off, a limit on players contesting ball-ins, awarding 3 points for the ball hitting the post, and a red card rule. Yeah, that debate isn't new, it's older than Volkswagen. There were doubts that it may eliminate the long-kicking, high-marking game. This may be because the throw pass seemed like a fancy hand pass, which in those days was seen about once a month. That's a joke, of course. 1938 saw the first year of throw pass competition, and it immediately saw higher scoring, disposal, and handballing numbers, with kick and mark numbers staying roughly the same. Crowds flocked to see the new style of game, with a 50% increase in average attendance in 1938 and 22% in 1939. 1939 also saw an extended season to maximise gate receipts, with the grand final scheduled a week after the VFLs, allowing the VFA to use the MCG. 47,000 people showed up, an all-time record VFA crowd.
This was music to the ears of those from the Apple Isle. The Tasmanian, Mercury and Advocate newspapers had followed the VFA with intrigue, as they'd been attempting to introduce throw passing to the ANFC rulebook since 1914.
Tasmania voted to adopt the throw pass into the ANFC's national rulebook, but no other state seconded the motion. The ANFC did adopt the return of the throw-in and the VFA's version of the holding the ball rule, however. As a result of the VFA adopting different rules from the VFL, they voted to end the player transfer agreement between them. As a non-member of the ANFC, players had to be given special clearance to transfer between leagues, which was included in playing contract clauses. Now the need for permits wasn't required, but the clauses still applied, so the clubs could make free transfers, but the players couldn't. Anyone who made the move from the VFL to the VFA needed to stand out of all football for 3 years in order to return to the league he'd moved from. It wasn't a great incentive to move. What was, though, was money. The VFL's Coulter laws capped player payment at £4 per match, equivalent to $380 in 2021, with no other lump sum payment allowed. Some clubs, like Hawthorn, couldn't even pay anywhere near that much. This controlled spending and had saved the league during the Depression, but the VFA had no such cap. The VFA also had no minimum payment cap either, which presented the odd scenario of star VFL players moving to the VFA and rank-and-file VFA players moving to the VFL, both for more money.
Bloods legends Bob Pratt and Laurie Nash were the highest profile switches to the VFA, with Nash bringing in £8 per game. Rod Todd came along in 1940, earning over 10 times what he was getting in the VFL. These three alone kicked 1,353 goals, averaging 5.3 per game each. Brownlow medalists Des Fothergill and Herbie Matthews, as well as Harry Valance, Ted Freyer, the Collier brothers, and even Jack Dyer and Roy Kazali were among the names that defected to the VFA in search for more money. In turn, the crowds swelled further. So yeah, it's not just live golf and World Series cricket. Athletes have, just like you and me, always been willing to move for better money. Always.
Before most of those superstars had crossed over from the VFL, the association was in quite a comfortable position. Gate takings were up, and they were even considering introducing the new football code of rules to schools in their areas. A matter of concern was the VFL attempting to shut them out of the MCG for 1939. A Mr. Reid, the VFA vice president, had argued in Parliament that this was unfair. In response, the VFL chair authored a letter to the Victorian Premier in complaint, which Reid's VFA buddies seemed to find very funny.
And then, just like it had done to universal football, a world war came and ruined everything. While the Metropolitan VFL continued on, the geographically spread VFA was forced to shutter up in 1942. The VFA gave temporary clearances for its players to play in the VFL, but for those serving their 3-year bans, they had to sit out. The VFA failed to resume until 1945, right as those 3-year bans had elapsed. The hiatus had left the VFA clubs with next to no money to play with, and so many of their stars fled back to the VFL. Ron Todd was the only superstar left, and he showed it with a 188-goal season that will never be beaten in state senior level footy. The smaller leagues that had bought into the VFA rule set now bought out, and growth for the code suddenly stopped. The crowds kept on growing, though partially as a result of 3 years of waiting for regional suburban football, and partially because fuel rationing meant that people in Sandringham and Williamstown couldn't travel to the MCG anymore. By the end of the 1940s, the game had evolved further. Positional limitations were being eroded and causing the sort of roving scrums the throw-pass rules had been designed to eliminate. The crowds had started to drop again, and some of the club delegates thought the novelty of the different rule set had worn off. The schism worked against the best interests of football as a whole. It allowed either league to hoard talent and damage the reputation of the game in emerging footballing states. If one side were to indeed win, it meant the demolition of football in large parts of Victoria. So the VFA decided it was ready to negotiate unified control of Victorian football with the VFL, which would certainly mean it would have to very literally play by the VFL's rules. After some amalgamation discussions, one of which proposed a two-tiered league system, the ANFC decided to give the VFA a seat at its table, giving the league a voice, the voice it had wanted for so long. This presented a united front to the rugby states, as well as providing a platform for a planned American invasion, which never really came about. So, in late 1949, the VFA abandoned its rule changes in return for a bevy of privileges, including getting voting rights 4 years later. This, though, was seen as an admission of the VFA's second fiddle status, and combined with the effects of the lifting of fuel rationing, crowds dwindled again. The VFA tried to get them back in 1951 by reintroducing the throw-pass rule, but failed to get it past the ANFC Council. Despite some clubs wanting to throw pass so badly they wanted the league to secede from the council, the throw pass remained consigned to history. The VFA was eventually expelled from the council in 1970. By this point, the handball was serving the purpose that the throw pass had in the 1930s. They did manage to get their 16-a-side rule, though, and played that way for 3 years, plus another 30, wow. In the ultimate twist of irony, it is now called the VFL, and serves as a reserves league for the Eastern Seaboard clubs of what used to be the VFL, now AFL. So what was the legacy of this madcap 10 years? Well, the VFA schism gave us a version of the holding the ball rule that actually works, which despite interpretation changes still exists today, for better or worse. It incentivized wing play with the reintroduction of throw-ins, which gave us some fantastic moments. It also laid the foundations for the handball-heavy game style we see today. Guys like Ken Farmer and Reg Wilmot foresaw the hiring of athletes over footballers 70 years before it happened, thanks to the throw-pass rule. As the 1960s rolled around, for the first time in decades, football in Victoria was unified. Everything was fine, just in time for things to fall apart. Interlopers from beyond Victoria's walls threatened to become the best leagues in the game. But the VFL had a taste for blood. They had no choice. They had to go into battle once more.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for watching, everyone. I'd like to give an extra special shout out to my Patreon members: Cody Bibby, Some Geek from Twitter, Timanuel Kunt, Seamus O'Dowd Clancy, and Gritty-O M. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. If you want to join, the Patreon link is in the description, and I'll see you all next time.